Brother and sister, there's a moment in every life, not loud, not dramatic, when something inside whispers, "This isn't it. Not yet." Maybe it happens after a long day you can't explain your exhaustion. Maybe it happens at 2 a.m. while the house is quiet. Maybe it happens in the middle of a meeting where you realize you're living a life you never actually chose. That small whisper, that tug, is your inner compass trying to get your attention. And here's the truth. Most people spend their entire lives ignoring it, not because they don't want direction, but because no one ever taught them how to listen. So if you've ever felt stuck, lost, overwhelmed, or strangely disconnected from your own life, stay with me. By the end of this talk, you'll have not only a sense of your direction, but the courage to start walking toward it. There's a moment in every person's life when something inside begins to stir, not loudly, not with fanfare, but with the quiet insistence of truth trying to find its way to the surface. This is the magnetic pull of something more. The sensation that nudges at the edges of your awareness when you're moving through a life that looks fine from the outside but doesn't quite feel like yours on the inside. It shows up in moments when you should feel satisfied but don't, in moments when the world applauds and you still feel strangely empty, in moments when you realize you've built a life based on expectations rather than intention. That inner tug isn't random. It's the compass within you trying to point toward your real direction. But the world rarely teaches us how to recognize that tug, let alone trust it. Most of us are trained from a young age to follow the map handed to us, what success should look like, what stability means, what paths are respectable or practical. We learn to measure our lives against standards that were never ours to begin with. So when that whisper inside says, "There's something else here," it can feel confusing or inconvenient. We brush it off. We tell ourselves we're ungrateful. We tell ourselves it's too late to change. We tell ourselves that discomfort is normal, and in doing so, we silence the most important signal we have. Yet if you've ever had that moment, standing in the middle of what should be your dream, feeling a quiet ache you can't explain, you already know the whisper doesn't go away. It waits, it lingers, it returns in moments when your defenses are down. It shows up in long drives, late nights, early mornings, conversations that cut deeper than expected. It shows up whenever you come into contact with your real self. That inner compass is persistent not because it's trying to disrupt your life, but because it's trying to reconnect you to it. Most people feel this pull, but almost no one talks about it. We're afraid to admit that something inside us is misaligned because doing so forces us to confront the possibility that we might need to change, and change, real, internal, direction-shifting change, is uncomfortable. But it's also the birthplace of authenticity. When you begin to acknowledge that inner pull, when you stop dismissing it as impractical or indulgent, something powerful happens. Your life starts to feel like it belongs to you again. This keynote opens the door to that realization. It invites the listener to recognize the tug for what it is, an early signal of alignment calling you back to your real direction. It holds up a mirror and says, "This feeling you've been ignoring, it matters." It offers permission to listen, permission to question, permission to stop performing and start paying attention. And more importantly, it promises that the journey ahead will not only clarify your direction, but also reconnect you with the part of yourself you may have abandoned along the way. This introduction is meant to create a moment where the listener feels seen, understood, and compelled to keep listening. Not because the story is dramatic, but because it's theirs, because somewhere inside they know this whisper well. They've heard it, they've felt it, and now they're finally ready to follow where it leads. We live in a world where noise has become the default setting, constant, relentless, and often disguised as guidance. It comes from places that claim to know what's best for us: family, culture, social media, tradition, comparison, and the invisible rulebook we were handed long before we knew we had a choice. This noise is persuasive. It's loud, it's persistent. It tells us who we should be, what we should want, and how we should measure our worth. And because it's everywhere, we start to mistake it for truth. But deep underneath that noise is something quieter, something steady, something you can barely hear unless you make space for it. That's your knowing, not your opinion, not your fear, not your conditioning. Your knowing, it's the voice that doesn't argue or demand. It doesn't pressure or manipulate. It simply presents itself. a calm, grounded sense of what's right for you even when you can't explain it. The difference between noise and knowing isn't about volume, it's about resonance. Noise shakes you, knowing settles you. Most people are more familiar with noise because it's been the soundtrack of their entire lives. We grow up taught to listen to the voices around us long before we're taught to listen to the voice within us. So when we feel confusion or conflict about a decision, we instinctively turn outward. We poll opinions. We search for validation. We try to find certainty in someone else's certainty. But that almost always leads to more confusion because no one outside of you has access to your internal truth. Knowing has a different tone. It's the feeling you get when something aligns so deeply that it feels like relief. It's the moment your body relaxes even if your brain hasn't caught up yet. It's the uncomfortable honesty that nudges you towards something bigger than fear. Knowing doesn't always give you the path, but it gives you the direction. And because it's not loud, you have to choose it intentionally. One of the most common reasons people miss their inner compass is because noise masquerades as safety. It tells you to choose the predictable path, to stay where you're understood, to be agreeable, impressive, or easy to explain. Noise prioritizes approval over authenticity. Knowing doesn't care if your choices make sense to anyone else. It cares if they make sense to you. A powerful way to recognize the difference is by noticing how each one feels in your body. Noise creates urgency, pressure, and a sense of hurry up before you mess this up. Knowing creates steadiness. Even when it points you toward a difficult choice, it carries a sense of truth rather than panic. Noise demands answers immediately. Knowing is patient. Noise pushes. Knowing pulls. The moment we learn to separate the two, something profound happens. Life becomes clearer. Not easier, not suddenly perfect, but clearer. Decisions feel less like battles and more like alignments. You start to trust yourself, not because you have every detail figured out, but because you can finally hear yourself beneath the world's expectations. And in that space, your inner compass becomes not just visible, but trustworthy, guiding you toward the life that fits who you truly are rather than who you've been told to be. Courage is often romanticized as something bold and dramatic, running into the fire, standing on a mountaintop, declaring your truth with unwavering certainty. But the kind of courage required to follow your inner compass looks very different. It is quieter, more personal, and far more demanding. It begins with honesty, not the polished kind we offer the world, but the raw, unfiltered honesty we often avoid even with ourselves. The kind of honesty that asks, is this really my path, or is this just the path I thought I was supposed to take? That question alone can unravel years of performance, obligation, and carefully constructed identity. Listening to your inner compass is one thing, following it is something else entirely. Because the moment you decide to honor what you know deep down, you also have to face the very real possibility that your choices may disappoint people you love. You may disrupt the version of you that others have grown comfortable with. You may have to step away from roles that once earned you approval. Courage shows up in those moments, when you choose authenticity over belonging, truth over validation, growth over predictability. There is a specific kind of vulnerability that comes with choosing your own direction. It's the vulnerability of stepping into a future without the safety net of external approval. It's the vulnerability of admitting that the life you built, the one that checked all the boxes, isn't aligned anymore. And that is uncomfortable because it means change, real change. Not cosmetic adjustments or minor tweaks, but internal transformation that shifts how you see yourself and what you're willing to accept. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision that your truth matters more than your fear. It's choosing to move forward even while your voice shakes, even while you second guess, even while the people around you ask questions you don't yet know how to answer. Following your inner compass rarely comes with perfect clarity. Most of the time, it comes with trembling hands, a racing heart, and the quiet conviction that staying where you are is no longer an option. There is also the courage to release, to let go of the identities that no longer fit. To loosen your grip on stories you've outgrown, to step away from the expectations that once anchored you but now keep you stagnant. Letting go is a brave act because it creates space, empty, unfamiliar space. But that space is where your true direction can finally take shape. And then there's the courage to trust, trusting that the inner pull you feel is not a mistake or a phase, trusting that you are allowed to choose yourself even when it's inconvenient, trusting that the life calling to you is worth the risks you'll have to take. Trust takes practice, and it grows every time you choose alignment over fear, every time you act on what you know instead of what you're told. Ultimately, courage is not a single moment. It's a series of small, consistent choices to honor the truth inside you. It is the willingness to rewrite your life in real time, to walk into uncertainty with your values as your anchor, and to choose the path that feels honest even when it isn't easy. When you follow your inner compass with courage, you don't just change your direction, you reclaim your life. Uncertainty is one of the most misunderstood parts of personal growth. Most of us believe that clarity should come first, that we need the full map, the detailed plan, the guaranteed outcome before we can take a single step in a new direction. We wait for certainty as if it's a prerequisite for motion. But in reality, certainty is often the result of motion. The inner compass doesn't hand you a blueprint. It offers a nudge, a pull, a quiet direction that makes sense only in hindsight. The discomfort we feel around uncertainty isn't a sign that we're unprepared. It's a sign that we're crossing the threshold between who we've been and who we're becoming. We live in a culture that worships certainty. Predictability is praised. Control is treated like security. People are taught to color inside the lines and to see ambiguity as a threat rather than an invitation. So when your inner compass points you towards something undefined, an idea, a shift, a desire, a calling, it can feel unsettling. The mind immediately wants answers. What if this doesn't work? What if this is a mistake? What if people don't understand? The fear doesn't mean you're off track. In fact, fear often means you're finally stepping onto a track that matters. Uncertainty is not the enemy. It's an essential companion of authenticity. The moment you choose a path aligned with your truth, you leave behind the illusion of control that came from following someone else's script. The familiar path feels safe not because it's right, but because it's predictable. When you let go of that predictability, when you take even one small step towards something unknown but deeply felt, you enter a space where possibility expands. The unknown stops being a void and becomes a landscape waiting to be explored. Many people stall their growth because they're waiting for a level of clarity that simply does not exist at the beginning of any meaningful path. Your inner compass isn't designed to eliminate uncertainty. It's designed to help you walk through it. It shows you the next step, not the entire journey. The mistake isn't taking the wrong step. The mistake is refusing to step at all. Movement creates momentum. Momentum creates insight. Insight creates clarity. But none of that happens if you stay rooted in fear. There is also a profound truth hidden in uncertainty. It teaches you to trust yourself. When you can't rely on predictable outcomes, you learn to rely on your values, your instincts, your intuition. You learn to check in with your inner compass instead of the noise around you. You learn to navigate life not by external markers, but by inner alignment. That kind of trust doesn't come from thinking. It comes from living, from experimenting, from choosing, from failing and adjusting, from moving even when you don't have all the answers. Uncertainty is uncomfortable, yes, but discomfort is not danger. Discomfort is growth. Discomfort is expansion. Discomfort is the opening where transformation becomes possible. When you stop treating uncertainty as something to fear and start treating it as a natural part of the journey, you stop waiting for clarity and start creating it. And in that space where courage meets not knowing, you begin to see that your inner compass has been guiding you all along, not toward perfection or predictability, but toward possibility, authenticity, and the life that's finally aligned with who you are. When life begins to feel heavy, confusing, or misaligned, it's usually because we've drifted too far from ourselves. It doesn't happen all at once. It happens little by little. One small compromise, one ignored boundary, one moment of choosing comfort over honesty, one decision made to avoid disappointing someone else. Eventually, you wake up and feel like you're living on autopilot, disconnected from your own values, your own desires, your own inner compass. The way back isn't found in dramatic reinvention or grand declarations. It begins with returning to yourself gently and consistently in the small moments where alignment is rebuilt. Returning to yourself is not a sentimental idea, it's a practice, and like all practices, it requires intentionality. One of the first places this practice begins is with reflection, not the kind where you spiral into overthinking, but the kind where you pause long enough to ask yourself honest questions. What do I really want? What is draining me? What is nourishing me? What values feel alive in me? Where am I abandoning myself to meet someone else's expectations? These questions create space for awareness, space for truth, space for recognizing the difference between who you are and who you've been pretending to be. Stillness is another essential part of this return. In a world built on constant motion, stillness can feel uncomfortable, even pointless, but stillness is where your inner compass becomes audible. When you slow down, you can actually hear yourself think, feel, and remember. Stillness isn't about doing nothing. It's about quieting the world long enough to reconnect with the part of you that knows. You cannot access clarity while sprinting. Stillness is the pause that realigns the path. Honesty is also a powerful form of returning to yourself. It means admitting when something no longer fits, when something you once wanted is no longer your truth, when you are outgrowing spaces or relationships or identities that once felt like home. This kind of honesty can be uncomfortable because it disrupts the familiar, but it is the only way to build a life rooted in authenticity rather than expectation. When you tell yourself the truth, even privately, you create the foundation for every aligned decision that follows. Boundaries are another way of protecting your alignment. They are not walls, they are commitments. Commitments to your energy, your peace, your values, and your direction. A boundary says, this is where I end and where something else begins. Without boundaries, your inner compass gets drowned in obligations, guilt, and other people's needs. With boundaries, your inner world becomes clearer, safer, and more grounded. You're able to devote your time and energy to what truly matters to you. Returning to yourself also means reconnecting with your values. Values are not theories, they are anchors. When you're unclear about what you stand for, you drift. When your values are active, meaning you use them to guide your choices, your direction becomes more obvious. Decisions that once created anxiety now become simpler because you're no longer choosing between right and wrong. You're choosing between aligned and misaligned. These practices, reflection, stillness, honesty, boundaries, and values, are not quick fixes. They are daily invitations to come home to yourself. The more you engage with them, the stronger your connection to your inner compass becomes. You stop searching for direction outside of yourself and begin to cultivate it within. You stop trying to force a life that no longer fits and begin to shape a life that honors who you truly are. This is how alignment is restored, not through radical transformation, but through a steady return to the person you were always meant to be. There comes a point in every journey where you realize that no one can walk your path for you. People can guide you, support you, encourage you, or even try to redirect you, but the map of your life is ultimately drawn by your own hand. Becoming the author of your own map is not about rejecting help or ignoring wisdom. It's about recognizing that the only person who truly understands the terrain of your soul is you. It's about stepping into the responsibility and the privilege of shaping a life that reflects your deepest truth rather than someone else's idea of who you should be. When you begin to trust your inner compass, you stop looking for certainty in external places. You learn to rely less on the markers society uses to define success and more on the internal markers that define meaning. This shift is subtle but profound. Instead of asking, "What will people think?" you begin asking, "What feels right to me?" Instead of focusing on what looks impressive from the outside, you begin choosing what feels authentic on the inside. You realize that the most fulfilling life isn't the one that's most understood by others, but the one that's most aligned with yourself. Becoming the author of your map also means releasing the belief that your path must look linear or logical. Life isn't a straight line, it's a series of seasons, detours, discoveries, and transformations. When you embrace this truth, you stop treating every step as a test and start treating it as part of the unfolding. You allow yourself to pivot when something no longer fits. You allow yourself to explore new directions without needing a guarantee. You understand that growth often requires rerouting, and that changing direction isn't failure, it's alignment. There's a freedom that comes when you stop waiting for permission to live the life you feel called to live. Many people spend years holding back dreams, desires, and decisions because they're waiting for the right moment or for someone else to validate what they already know. But the right moment is rarely obvious, and validation rarely comes at the beginning. When you become the author, you stop waiting for approval and begin trusting your own timing. You choose to move because the direction feels true, not because the path is easy or predictable, and with authorship comes responsibility. Not the heavy kind that weighs you down, but the empowering kind that reminds you of your agency. When you claim your map, you also claim accountability for the choices you make. You stop blaming circumstances, expectations, or the past. Instead, you acknowledge your ability to shape what comes next. You write the next chapter with intention, not obligation. You choose your values, your boundaries, your pace, and your priorities. Becoming the author of your own map means recognizing that your path doesn't need to look like anyone else's. We are each born with a unique constellation of gifts, experiences, dreams, and truths. When you follow your inner compass, your life becomes an expression of that uniqueness. The comparison fades, the pressure fades, the need to justify your choices fades. What remains is authenticity, a life that feels like home. This is the promise of the inner compass, not that it will lead you to a perfect life, but that it will lead you to your life. A life shaped not by fear, not by noise, not by expectation, but by the quiet, steady knowing that has always lived within you. And once you begin to live from that place, every step becomes clearer, every choice becomes more aligned, and your path becomes unmistakably, unapologetically your own.